Hi, I'm Alison. Welcome to Dream Chasers Adventures in Happiness, where my band of superhero guests and I share with you tales of daring do, life-changing journeys towards living our best lives. If you're after an injection of inspiration and ideas to live the life that you want and deserve, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Hi there, and welcome to the show where we serve up conversation, concepts and belief that it is entirely possible to create what you crave. If there's something stopping you from pursuing happiness, whatever that looks like to you from a career or lifestyle point of view, the stories and insights covered here are designed to help. Today, I am joined by my former client, Amy-Beth Mellor, who I'm personally super inspired by. Amy-Beth spent 20 years working in the NHS as a dietitian in pretty senior roles, whilst battling a number of physical health issues that she'd had since childhood, as well as an inexplicable level of exhaustion that left her pretty much unable to function during her time off. Then 3 years ago, she got a very late diagnosis of autism and ADHD, which finally shed some light on her long-held work struggle and started her journey to understanding her own requirements for a right fit career and lifestyle. Today, we're going to talk about Amy-Beth's experience trying to operate in a role that wasn't right for her and the impact it had, how she's determined the criteria for her ideal career, and the path that she's navigated to a job she absolutely loves, that she can't believe she gets paid to do. So today, she runs her own dog walking and pet sitting business in the Wirral, fabulously called 𝗘𝗣𝗜𝗦𝗘𝗟𝗟. So welcome to the show, Amy-Beth.
Thank you, Alison.
Thanks so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
Can I take you back to when you were working in the NHS, and could you paint a picture for us of the role that you were doing and also the health challenges that you were facing at that time?
Yeah, certainly. So I had quite a number of different roles in my career in the NHS. The vast majority of them were community-based, because even at that time I really struggled in the hospital settings. I didn't know why I struggled with it so much, but I remember even when I was on my placements that you have to do as part of your training, I would get what I now realise are sort of panic attacks when I was having to go on the ward and speak to patients. I decided to sort of do the vast majority of my career based in the community. So I would travel to patients' houses and meet with them in their own homes and do consultations there. Okay. I specialised in tube feeding, so that's for people who can't eat for one reason or another, or can't eat enough. They would have a tube placed either in their stomach or in their nose, and that would help to get them the nutrition that they needed whilst they were struggling. I particularly liked that part of dietetics because it was very clinical. It was quite kind of facts-based, and I just have to work out the formula for how much you need and tell you how to do it. So it was sort of a very set process of this is how you do, whereas other areas of dietetics are quite people-focused and kind of working with people to see what kind of food that they can take and how they can change their diet. So I really liked doing something that was more clinical and sort of straightforward and sticking to a routine, really. I worked in a number of places, over in Manchester, in Liverpool, and my latest job was in Liverpool community, where I was for a number of years, and I was with a really, really good team there, had a fantastic manager, and then COVID hit. So in 2020, we were all kind of sent home, not really knowing what was going on. And obviously everything came out with lockdown, and we had to plan how we were going to face that as a department. And being in that funny kind of juxtaposition of we're kind of frontline staff, but we can do some of our work from home, and we do telephone consultations and that kind of thing. And that absolutely filled me with dread, because I've always had a real issue with speaking to people on the phone. I find it really difficult to follow conversations on the phone. My mum used to make phone calls for me up until I was in my mid-20s if I had to phone anyone official or anything. And I just thought it was this sort of strange quirk that I had, that I just didn't like speaking on the phone, didn't really understand why. So yeah, that was really difficult when we were sent home and I had to do all these telephone consultations, and I would basically push them back as far as I possibly could in the day and sort of build myself up to doing them. And of course, eventually had to complete them. During this as well, they were actually needing a new team lead for the department, and I actually got that position during COVID, so it was a new role for me as well. So I was managing my own team, and so obviously a lot of dealing with staff issues and staff planning and all that kind of thing.
So a lot of peopling.
A lot of peopling, definitely, yes. And I'd always kind of known that peopling wasn't really my thing. I'm not entirely sure in retrospect why I went into a career that was almost entirely peopling. And then particularly so once I became a manager, because I was both peopling with my clients that I still saw, and I was peopling with my team as well, and often having to have difficult conversations with both patients. I dealt with a lot of palliative care patients. I worked for the 𝗘𝗣𝗜𝗦𝗘𝗟𝗟 for a number of years, and was a Macmillan dietitian through that. And even when I was back to the community, I was dealing with those kinds of patients because that was sort of the area of expertise that I had.
So not just peopling, but really tough, hard conversations.
Hard peopling, yes.
Yeah,
really difficult,
okay.
And I just found that it absolutely drained me. When I would come home from work in the evening, whether I'd been working from home or whether I'd been out seeing patients, I was just beyond exhausted. I was almost at a point where I couldn't speak some days. So to my now husband, I wouldn't be able to even get a sentence out. That's how exhausted I was. It was too much effort to talk for me. And I'd always put that because that had been going on for years, even prior to the pandemic. And I'd always put it down to these physical health problems that I had, because obviously physical health problems can cause fatigue. And then during COVID, I had days when I was working from home. I wasn't expending a lot of physical energy, and I was still getting that response. I was still exhausted, couldn't speak by the end of the day. My husband had to care for me effectively. He does all the cooking, everything in the evening, because I was just a zombie pretty much.
Stripped of all energy and ability to function.
Completely,
and just for listeners, like the physical health issues that you had going on, and some of these things you've had since childhood, can you just give a top level view of what they were, or kind of what you're dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 8 years old, I became unwell, and I was diagnosed at the time with juvenile arthritis. In retrospect, that was actually a misdiagnosis, and what I actually have is a genetic connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So that basically means all the collagen in my body, so you have collagen in your joints, you have it in your internal organs, your brain, everywhere pretty much, is too stretchy. And so that means that I get a lot of joint dislocations, a lot of injuries, a lot of tendon tears. I have some heart problems with that. I have gastro problems. So pretty much anywhere you can think of in the body, it can affect. So I was only actually diagnosed with that when I was 30, and that was through my own research. I was always very much a researcher, and in work I used to be called the walking medical dictionary, because from a young age, I used to check the medical dictionary out of the library and learn about all these different conditions that I was fascinated with.
There were a great many clues, like looking back and listening to this, you know.
Yes.
And you were busy just thinking, these are my quirks, these are things there's something, you know, I've just got to, and doing absolutely everything you could to work around them.
Absolutely.
And sort of force fit yourself to get beyond them, or find little hacks to, you know.
To keep going and try and live a normal life, really.
So you had that going on in the background, as well as this absolute abject exhaustion to the point of being non-verbal and not being able to function. Can you share how your autism and ADHD diagnosis came about, and like what impact it had on your understanding of yourself and your needs from like a work and a lifestyle point of view?
Yes, yeah. So the diagnosis actually came about, sort of the process to getting diagnosed from the early pandemic. So once I kind of realised that this exhaustion wasn't just down to my physical health problems, it was still continuing even when I wasn't going out. And the fact as well that when the first lockdown happened, I basically went to pieces. I couldn't cope with this massive shift of life just being completely different to how any of us recognised it. And I know lots of people struggle with that and struggled with their mental health during lockdowns. But mine was to a really severe level. Doing bizarre things that just wouldn't make sense, like getting really het up over the food delivery and having to have everything sort of organised and controlled within that food delivery, and just some sort of quite odd coping behaviours really. And it made me start to think, like, why am I struggling more than everybody else I know with this? And it really became apparent that perhaps the reason for that might be autism. So like I said previously, I like to research particularly medical things, and over the years leading up to that, I had come across autism, particularly in women. I think it was starting to get a bit more well known that autism isn't this sort of traditional idea of everybody has in the head of Rain Man, or, you know, the autistic little boy that loves trains and that kind of thing. So more was becoming known about how autism can present differently, particularly in assigned female at birth people. And I started identifying with that when I was coming across these things. And the more I researched it, the more I thought, this is me. This explains everything I've been struggling with and why I'm struggling with it. And so I was referred on the NHS initially through my GP. And the waiting list for that was 4 to 5 years long.
Wow. 4 to 5 years?
4 to 5 years. Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. I actually just the other day received the phone call from the NHS because apparently I hadn't been taken off their waiting list saying, we can now see you. I was like, I don't need to, thank you. So what actually happened was I had an incredibly supportive manager at my last NHS job. She was an absolute godsend. She was brilliant. And because she knew I was struggling, we were meeting virtually on a weekly basis and talking about how I was coping with this new role of being a manager. And she was brilliant. She gave me everything I needed. And eventually I worked up the courage to bring up this idea to her that I thought I might be autistic and this is why I'm struggling so much. And she did some research and asked some questions around the colleagues that we had and came to the conclusion that there was a autism diagnosis service within the trust that we worked for.
Okay.
And they agreed to assess me. It's still on the NHS or by an NHS service, but my department funded that privately. So which was incredibly kind, and I'm so grateful for that to this day. It changed my life. And so that was how I ended up with the autism diagnosis. The ADHD diagnosis, which I also found I had as well, and often those two things do occur very regularly together, was through the NHS again, but through a service called Right to Choose. So for any specialist care, all patients in England have the right to choose who their provider is for that care. So a number of private companies have sprung up to cover this increasing need because the waiting lists were so long. And you can get referred to those that have NHS contracts to provide those services. So I went through a company called Psychiatry UK, which is one of the biggest ones that does the ADHD diagnosis. And I actually ended up getting diagnosed with both in the same month. So that was a real sort of life-changing.
So I can imagine, and like thinking about this, you know, through a work as well as a lifestyle filter, but from a work one first off. What did it mean? Like, as you understood these diagnoses and kind of what they meant for you, what did it mean you needed from a career choice? Like, what kinds of things became very apparent?
Very apparent that it was something very different to what I had been trying to do. So I was obviously in a role that was almost entirely people-facing, dealing with patients day in, day out, and the anxiety that gave me was overwhelming. I mean, I still get nightmares now where I think I'm back working in dietetics and I've got to go and see some patients, and I'm like, no, I can't, I don't want to. And I used to have to build myself up so much, and I came up with kind of standard scripts for kind of how I would carry out a consultation, and always had those notes with me. Even when I'd been working in it for nearly 20 years, you think you'd know it like the back of your hand, but I still had to follow this script that I'd made up to try and help me deal with the situation. And I think it gave me almost the permission that, oh, actually, there is something underlying here. It's not just me. I'm not just rubbish. It's not that I can't cope with it. Because
really
I was
important.
constantly trying to push myself through, and just that pushing and pushing and pushing for years just led to this utter exhaustion where I couldn't cope with it anymore. And I came to the conclusion, so I actually went through a period of burnout shortly after I got married in September 2021. So a combination of pandemic, planning a wedding during a pandemic, very stressful, and the ongoing job and the demands of that job as a manager in particular, just led me to the biggest burnout that I've had, really. And so I was signed off sick from work for a number of months, and came to the conclusion in that time that I didn't want to return to the NHS. I didn't want to return to that career. And it was a difficult choice because I'd put, you know, a great deal of effort and a number of years into that. It was hard. And
you're obviously really good at it, despite all of the struggle. You know, it's a testament to you that you know, you found ways, even though it was killing you, you pushed through. You were obviously very good at it. You kept being promoted. You were being given quite senior roles, but it was just entirely the wrong fit.
It was. The thing was that I had to give my everything in order to do that, and it meant that I had no life outside work. And I decided that's not how I want to continue the rest of my life. I've done it enough. So I handed in my notice at that position whilst I was off sick, and didn't really have a good idea of what I wanted to go to next, which is where you came in. And we had our career coaching sessions, which were amazing, and really helped me to focus in on what those core values were and what I needed out of a career. And so
there were some very specific things, weren't there?
There were.
And again, because partly because of the autism and the ADHD, but also just you as a person. You know, other than the fact that it needed to be something that didn't have a whole ton of people interaction on a daily basis. You know, I remember the thing that I absolutely love. One of the things I loved was just your the in-depth knowledge that you had on specific areas that you were passionate about. Obviously, health had been one, and you were a medical encyclopedia for your colleagues. But you know, whatever you focus your mind on, you would just know absolutely everything and anything that there was to know about those subjects and be very passionate about them. And it also, I mean, it was also really important that you were in control of your work pattern, that there was a level of flexibility, particularly given the physical health challenges that you're still having to manage. So being able to do something where you were an individual contributor and you could control the way in which you work seemed really important.
Definitely,
you know, and something that made the most of your amazing organisational skills came up time and time again.
It did. I do love a list and diary planning, and organisation is.
I remember when we were chatting about this, and you were telling me about the research that you'd done for the for your potential honeymoon destinations. You were looking at the Maldives, and you had basically reviewed, in a way I've never heard, like, I don't know how many islands it was, and you had a whole list of criteria, and you'd rated them on everything. Like, people would pay for that. People would pay for that research.
I should market it, really.
You should market it. But again, it just shows how your brain works.
Exactly. Yeah, it was 143 different resorts, I think it was, so it wasn't a small amount.
Amazing. So once you had your ideal career criteria kind of pinned down, what move did you make next? Like, what type of work did you try out first?
Mm-hmm. So there was kind of two main areas that I think we identified. So we talked about my love of dogs and in-depth special interest in dogs, which again I'd had since I was a child, and same as I was a medical encyclopedia, I was also a dog encyclopedia. I had memorised every single breed of dog by the time I was about 10 years old. Wow. And that was definitely a big interest of mine. But I think my concern was that I wouldn't be able to cope with it physically, because obviously anytime you're working with dogs, it quite often is a physical job. So I was always a bit reluctant and thought, am I going to be able to cope with that? Am I just going to end up exhausted again or injured or something? And so I kind of pushed myself down the other route, which is, I think I'd almost latched on to the kind of traditional expectation of autistic people of working in tech. So that's, you don't have to people that much, or so I thought. And, it's very logical and analytical, and it sort of played into those skills that I had, I think. So what actually came up was an opportunity to work at my husband's company, so a small startup, not that he owns but that he is a part of, and I was very grateful for that, because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have once my NHS position had come to an end, I was like, well, how are we going to pay the bills? So I decided to take that position. And it was working in cloud computing. It was Salesforce software, if anybody's heard of that. It's the biggest CRM platform out there. And I got quite enthused about it. I started learning how to do the job, and there's a lot of sort of certifications that you need, and sort of training, getting to know the system. And so, I went in there kind of all guns blazing, and really wanting to do it and give it a go. And I actually obtained the fastest number of certifications that has ever been achieved in the company. Just, like going into it 110%, as I always do, throwing myself in. The problem was that didn't necessarily translate to being able to do the actual job. So the actual job was far more peopling again than I'd anticipated, because they're a Salesforce consultancy. They work with clients every day in, day out. They're gathering requirements from clients and what they want from their software. And it was, a lot of virtual meetings, talking with clients all day long. And also getting quite a lot of constructive criticism, shall I say, from clients of, no, that's not what we want this. And I found that very difficult to deal with, because again, the worst type of peopling for me is confrontational peopling. And often a symptom of being autistic is sort of perfectionism, and I would try my hardest at a piece of work and think that it was perfect, and then you go back to the client and they're like, no, that's not what we want at all. So I found that very disheartening, and again, I was getting that drained feeling after a few months of coming home, not being able to do anything, being exhausted, and starting to get very stressed by that job again. And I just thought, I'm ending up in the same situation, I'm repeating the same pattern. This clearly isn't the job for me. Although I loved working at that company, I actually really enjoyed working with my husband. Some people might find that surprising, but we did work really well together. And they were a lovely group of people. Vast majority of them, I would also say, were neurodivergent as well, so that's probably why that worked so well, living up to the cliche. So I was sad to leave because they were a lovely company. But we had actually got a puppy, and the combination of trying to deal with that puppy, if any of your listeners have ever had a puppy, it's very similar to having a newborn baby, except this one runs around and it has tiny little razors in its mouth. So I would say even more difficult than a newborn baby, really, because you put a newborn baby down and they just stay there. So yeah, I kind of again was going into burnout again, and also a few months prior, in December 2022, I'd had a really bad injury to my back, like really bad. It had landed me in a wheelchair. Unfortunately, again, I was in a wheelchair when I was younger as well, and it was related to my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the reason that I had this quite severe back injury that was impinging on the nerves in my spine, basically. So a combination of having to deal with that, the pain from that, being on quite high dose medication. I'd had to stop my ADHD medication because all of this was causing high blood pressure, and all of that together made me feel that I can't carry on doing this. Yeah. So I gave up work completely for some time just to concentrate on getting my health back on track and getting my back better. And I was getting bored at home. I'm not the kind of person that can just do nothing. I don't relax very well. No.
Sure, it's quite obvious from the way you are. Yeah.
And so I was back to thinking, okay, so I've tried something else, that didn't work. I don't want to go back to dietetics, I know that. What else can I do? And it brought me back to the dog thing. And especially since we got our own puppy and I'd experienced the joy of training him, not always joy, vast majority joy, and just reignited my passion for dogs, and I love being around them. We went to lots of sort of social dog things. I'd started working very closely with a daycare and training local to me, and was just, that's where I found my happy. Even when I was in all this pain, I was like, this is it. This is how I want to feel. Yeah.
So that whole thing. So it sparked the idea of a dog walking and pet sitting business.
It did.
Of your own.
Yeah.
So basically, you in May 2023, so last year, you started Furry Poppins. Still think that's an excellent name.
Thank you.
Like, where did you begin and how did you get it up and running? So you were starting from scratch. You had done, you'd been 20 years in the NHS. You've done this bit of work in the software industry, and then suddenly it's something completely different again. How did you get going?
So I started with learning as much as I could. Again, the research. I did a number of online courses around sort of dog behaviour and dog management. Actually ended up doing level 2 𝗘𝗣𝗜𝗦𝗘𝗟 qualification in canine care and welfare, which was really useful. And then I just sort of started slowly, because at that time I was still suffering with my back quite a lot, and I just started with the pet pop-in side of things. So yeah, just kind of advertising on local Facebook groups. Obviously the good thing about the tech industry that I had tried was that I'd gained quite a few number of skills from that. So kind of done a bit of graphic design. I knew more about the commercial world than I did previously, because obviously having always worked for a public service, I didn't really have any clue how the world of business worked. And it's still the bit that I probably struggle with the most, I would say. But yeah, just starting from there, building up my social media, doing a website, learning as much as I could about what competition was already out there, what were their price points, what services were they offering, what could I offer to be different and to stand out. And yeah, just started kind of looking for anyone that was looking for dog care, cat care, or any kind of pet care in the local area, and saying, I'm available, I could do that. And it snowballed really quickly. Once my back started to get better, I was able to kind of throw myself into it more, and just got to a point now where I'm actually having to turn clients away because I'm that busy and I'm that fully booked, which
Amazing.
is just
I'm going to
unbelievable.
hazard. I love it. And I'm going to hazard a guess here that also I think it's very clear that you're a professional person. Right, so you've come from this background. You're somebody who clearly takes what you do very seriously. You're a fountain of knowledge, and I can only assume that your clients can see and feel that through you. You know, when they meet you and they know, okay, this person is going to take care of my animal or animals. So I'm sure that the fact that you had this professional background has actually really played to your favour.
Yes, definitely. I think that is my USP. That, you know, this kind of profession often attracts quite young women to it that perhaps haven't had a lot of experience out in the world, don't know how to necessarily act professionally. You know, there's some absolutely brilliant young ones out there as well that are fantastic at what they do. I'm become very good friends with someone who's in her mid-20s who is phenomenal at this job. She's absolutely brilliant. But then I also hear a lot of horror stories of things going wrong, pet sitters not turning up. You know, on a daily basis you hear of people doing this quite unprofessionally. So I really try to emphasise to my clients, you know, I'm perhaps more mature than your average dog walker and pet sitter, being the big 4-0 next year, and that I've worked going into patients' houses for umpteen years. I know how to respect someone's household, and that I am 100% reliable. I do what I say I will do.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that you're doing this, you've been doing it for a year, you're having to turn business away. Like, how does it make you feel doing this for a living? Like, what impact has it had on your health?
Oh, just huge impact. So I'm so much better from a health point of view now. My back is getting better all the time, because actually what heals my back most is walking. That's the best thing for it. So actually the part that I struggle with is sitting. So I couldn't have gone into any job that was desk based because I can't sit. Yeah, it's really difficult. That's what triggers the pain for me. Other health issues, so I also used to suffer from something called cluster headaches, which a lot of people probably haven't heard of, but another name for those is suicide headaches, because they're so intense that people literally want to kill themselves when they're happening. It's more like a seizure. A headache doesn't quite convey how bad it is. I was on oxygen therapy for that, so I had to carry oxygen canisters around with me at all times in case I had an attack, and it was just the worst pain I've ever experienced. And literally as soon as I left those previous jobs, the cluster headache stopped.
Wow.
And now
there is a message for your body was telling you in uncertain
100%.
terms, this is not it, this is not working.
No, don't do this to us.
Wow, so it's just removed it altogether.
Completely. Phenomenal. I haven't had one since, which was amazing. And
how does it feel? Like, how does it feel to be doing it?
It feels like it's not real. Especially if I have a few days off at a weekend or something, it still feels strange to go back to it the next week. It's like, do I really get to go and do that? People pay me to walk their dogs, and it's just, I find myself having moments of just pure joy when I'm out in a field in the middle of nowhere and the sun is shining down and with some gorgeous dogs that are loving life, and I'm getting to give them this amazing experience. We go, I don't do road walks, we always go somewhere countryside-y and fun for them, and just seeing the joy on their faces and how much fun they're having just absolutely fills me to the brim. This is my purpose in life. I can tell it because
you can see it. You can
so
see
happy.
The energy I feel the energy radiating from you. It's it's just amazing. Now I know, because you're naturally analytical and organised, you've already started thinking about the long-term future of your business and kind of how you might adapt it over time. Can you just share as a final thing, like, what you've been thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm well aware, particularly coming to this profession later in life, that it is a very physical job and I'm not necessarily always going to be able to do it. So I've been looking into things like dog boarding. So that's where when people are going on holiday or going away, the dogs come and stay with you in your house. You have to be licensed in order to do that. You have to have certain qualifications. So that's definitely an avenue I want to pursue in the future. I'm also really interested in dog training, so training to become a dog trainer, to give me that extra skill set to be able to work with perhaps dogs that have some problems. I know one of the careers we went quite in depth about was training assistance dogs for people with disabilities. And that's something I'm still really keen to do, because I think that would be the perfect marriage of my skills of having worked with disabled people, people with chronic illnesses, having that myself as well. I can really help people, I think, in that situation. That would give me a great sense of purpose that I am making a difference to not just dogs' lives but to people's lives as well, which I would still love to do.
Do you know, and I love this for you, because you're doing it. You're doing the things we talked about, the things that all of the criteria that came up, and you've stepped into it, and you know, it brings it all together beautifully in a way that clearly I can see it. It like is making you radiate joy and happiness and health.
Yes.
Super important. Amy-Beth. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it's interesting you say that, actually. I met with somebody yesterday that I haven't seen for quite a few months, and her first comment was, "You're glowing." Like it's radiating from you, like you change so much. And that's just what happiness does to you.
What being in the right job and being able to live the right kind of lifestyle does.
Absolutely.
Phenomenal. Well, listen, it's been absolutely amazing having you on the show, and thank you so much for sharing your personal stories so openly. If anyone is looking for an awesome dog walking or pet sitting service around the Wirral, like, how can they find you?
Yeah, sure. So I have a website that is 𝗘𝗣𝗜𝗦𝗘𝗟𝗟 with 1P, and the same names on Facebook and Instagram, and on there I share on an almost daily basis of all the adventures that me and the dogs get up to, so you can come and see some really cute doggies and give me a follow on there as well.
Brilliant. I will include all of this information in the show notes so people can find you. So yeah, and thank you once again for coming on. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, and I really hope that Amy-Beth's story has inspired you, particularly if you have a list of ideal career criteria that it feels really hard to accommodate. You know, just know that the right thing is out there and you really can make it happen, just like Amy-Beth has. And if you know anyone who would benefit from listening to this conversation and Amy-Beth's experience, please do share this episode. And until next time, just know I believe in you and your ability to create the life and the career you really want. So go do your thing.
Thank you for listening today. I hope our time together has got you thinking about your own adventure in happiness. So please do get in touch. I'd love to hear more about your story. And why not join our Dream Chasers Unite community? There is nothing better than an adventure shared. Until next time, be brave and go create what you crave.